Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. In this one I'm going to be reviewing The Mandalorian Season 2 Episode 1, and this episode is called The Marshal. So after quite a while we have the return of The Mandalorian, and in my mind they kicked off this new season with a really strong episode. Immediately one of the things that stood out to me was just 55 minutes long. I was very happy to see that. One of the things with some of the episodes in the first season was that I think one of them was as short as like 32 or 34 minutes. So to see this opening episode be like 20 minutes longer than certain episodes of the previous season was really good to see. And I hope most of the season episodes are closer to this length than what they did in the first season. Obviously, don't just put length in there for the sake of length, fill out the time, nicely. But for an episode like this, they absolutely needed all the time that they had, because this was quite an ambitious episode in terms of what it had to accomplish and explore and get into. Even though it ultimately was a little bit of a side quest type thing compared to the overall plot of The Mandalorian, which obviously is kind of quite broad in scope, in that it's get the child back to its people. And there's a lot of steps to go through before we're anywhere near bringing Baby Yoda back to the other Yoda species, and however they get there, however long that takes. So the thing with this episode is that, it was really good, but ultimately it didn't really progress the plot as such. This was very much more along the lines of the middle episodes from Season 1 than it was the opening and ending episodes, in that it's, okay, here's the quest that we have, I need to find the Mandalorian, so I could be directed to where to go next. And he thinks he finds one here in Mos Pelgo, I think is the name of this new section of Tatooine. And obviously we sort of know, like, okay, are they going to introduce Boba Fett right here? Because we had the tease from the Tatooine episode last season. But no, straight away when he appears on screen, it's not Boba Fett, because just the physique of the character wearing the armor just doesn't fit. And so when the helmet is taken off and it's just this guy that we've never seen before, it's like, okay, this fits, because obviously Boba Fett's sort of last moments that we saw were him falling into the Sarlacc pit, so he was going to be quote-unquote digested, so it would make sense the armor is separated from the character. And so at the end of the episode, when we get the reveal that, oh, here is Boba Fett without that armor, but he is alive and he's sort of scarred and stuff like that, that was a really nice way to do things, and that this clarifies a few things of, like, we thought we saw Boba Fett at the end of that Tatooine episode, and it seemingly confirms, I guess, now that it was, just not in the way we thought it was. So it's going to be interesting to see, does he get that armor back? When does he sort of make his move? Does he move against the Marshal, or does he go after the Mandalorian? My guess would be that he'd focus more on the Mandalorian, since I guess he's aware of where the armor is now. But, still, nice reveal of just like, yes, we sort of teased you a little bit at the start, but here is the character you were looking for at the start. He's actually here. So it was really cool to see Tamora Morrison, who obviously played Jango Fett and all of the clones in the prequels, and he's back here, and timeline-wise it fits. He looks as old as he should be again. Boba is an unaltered clone of Jango, so it all fits. So that's all really cool, and it's going to be exciting to see how they actually incorporate Boba into things. But like I said, this was in the grand scheme of things, a very light section of this episode. The whole episode wasn't necessarily about searching for a Mandalorian. That's just one section of what we ultimately need to do, and we didn't really even accomplish that. So the mission more switched to, oh, he sees someone who is not a Mandalorian wearing Mandalorian armor. It is part of the creed for him to get that back. And so the deal eventually gets made between the Mandalorian and the Marshal, to if the Mandalorian helps kill the Krayt Dragon that is harassing the town, the I keep wanting to call him the Warden, the Marshal, will hand over the armor, no questions. And ultimately, this is the deal that you expect to be made. This is the Mandalorian and sort of who he is. He could do things the sort of old school bounty hunter way, but no, he does have honor to him, so of course he would take this easier way ultimately to do things, to help a town but also get what he wants ultimately in the end. And so what we got was this really fascinating episode that went really in depth on something we didn't really know about before. And that was just kind of going more in depth into sort of just the sort of culture and the dynamics on Tatooine of just, here's one of the other Moss places. This is Mos Pelgo, even more sort of isolated, a much smaller town, kind of really, truly out in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't even look like it's a proper spaceport. It's just another town. And it's so isolated, it's basically not even on the map. And there's very few buildings there. And it kind of is just out in the middle of the Dune Sea. So I really liked how they got into the exploration of, like, when the Marshal tells his own backstory of, like, how did he come to acquire the armor and, you know, become the Marshal of this town. And it goes all the way back to, you know, coincide with the original trilogy, the destruction of the second Death Star. And we see them all in the cantina watching that happen, the destruction of the Death Star. And then he just gets across, like, immediately with the, you know, occupiers, the Empire gone. The mining corporation moved in straight away and just, you know, kill everyone, and only he and the bartender managed to escape. And as he escapes, he steals a Camtono, which actually contains a bunch of valuable crystals, from the mining company. And when he wanders out into the Dune Sea, the Jawas find him, and he exchanges, of course, the crystals for Boba Fett's armor, which they had, you know, scavenged, of course. So that all comes together really nicely. I believe it also connects quite well with the little bit in Star Wars Aftermath, one of the first, you know, canon novels that we have. I think it connects in quite well. Now, ultimately, I don't think many people recommend actually reading that book, because that is one of the few, I think, interesting pieces of information from that book overall. The overall book is not about Boba Fett. But I believe this character here, the Marshal's full name is... was it Cobb Vanth, I think it is. So it was kind of cool to see, you know, just a connection like that. But this is how he gets the armor, and then he is able to drive off the mining guys with the power, you know, that this armor has. And he's already, I suppose, reasonably skilled, but this armor allows him to really become the protector of the town. And it was a relatively short story, but I really liked how it just built up this character who is the co-main character of the episode. And because the Mandalorian himself is perhaps not the most, like, in-depth character, it really helps to flesh out the supporting characters as well. Because, you know, Baby Yoda's cute and all, and they do a great job at showing the little scenes with Baby Yoda. But, you know, the two fundamental main characters of the show, the Mandalorian and the child, are not, you know, the most, you know, in a way, like, expressive and in-depth characters. So he actually worked really well to just represent this whole village, while, you know, giving him a quite reasonably done backstory that they didn't have to spend too much of the episode on. But after that, you know, obviously the Krayt Dragon, you know, comes in. And this is cool because, you know, it's always been teased that the Krayt Dragon is, like, the really big, you know, predator on Tatooine. And I believe it's been covered in, like, video games and, like, comics and stuff like that. But we've never actually seen it in any of this, I suppose, sort of, like, you know, A+ sort of Star Wars material. And so it was really cool to see that become the focus of this episode. And especially when it was fully revealed towards the end, I actually really liked how it looked. I thought, you know, the CG that they did for it looked very good for such a giant animal in a live action TV show that's I suppose has a reasonable budget, but it's not a movie budget. So I think they definitely did a good job there. But what I think this episode, the biggest success of this was definitely the dynamic between the residents of Mos Pelgo and the Tusken Raiders. We obviously saw the Tuskens before to establish that the Mandalorian has the ability to communicate with them. He knows the Tusken language and understands their culture to a degree. So that was very cool to see, because you got this great moment of like team up from so many characters. The Mandalorian, the Marshal, the Tusken Raiders, and the townspeople all want the Krayt Dragon killed, because it is so big that when it comes out to hunt, it risks just completely destroying the town, which is tiny. And if it took the wrong path through the town, it could just completely wipe it off the face of the map. And it's already barely there on the map. But the problem is that to take down a monster this big, you need more than just, 2 people in Mandalorian armor and some Tusken Raiders. You need the team up of everyone, because that's how big a Krayt Dragon is. But the challenge is that we know from pretty much every single appearance of the Tusken Raiders, the Tuskens and the residents of Tatooine do not get along. It's complete opposites. And it's just been pretty clear. We typically view the Tusken Raiders as just being sort of, the bad guys. They're the savage, culture and stuff like that. Especially because such a key moment from the prequels is, of course, the Tuskens kidnapping Shmi Skywalker and then treating her so poorly that she dies, and Anakin wiping them out. And really the only, in any way, sort of sympathetic thing said about them is just the fact that, Anakin killed the women and children and stuff like that, which isn't typically like said of them. So it was actually cool to get this moment of like, we need the Tuskens to work with the people of Mos Pelgo. This isn't going to work. Like, immediately the Marshal is like, no, that's not going to work. And ultimately he's convinced by the Mandalorian. He gets to talk with them and so on. But what I thought one of the better scenes was when they went back to inform the townspeople and they have the big meeting. And the Marshal is obviously on board with the plan now, and it's like, we're going to have to work with them. They want it gone just as much as we do. We're going to have to work. And of course, the typical, they're not like us, they're different, this happened in the past, and so on happens. But in this case, they do just need to team up to make this happen. And ultimately, the deal is quite good. They work together on this, and it will save the town. And as part of this deal is that the Tuskens will not come and raid Mos Pelgo or attack anyone, so long as the people of Mos Pelgo don't attack them. So basically, like, the first shot fired, the deal is off, but until then, they are going to be at peace with each other. And I think the tension between the two factions was actually quite well done, because we haven't really ever had the Tuskens presented like this. Yes, there's been some EU stuff in the past that's kind of covered them in a slightly different light, that's delved much further into them as a culture. But a lot of the main material really hasn't, and they sort of have been always just presented as they were in the originals, in the prequels, as just being the sort of savage sand people who are just another enemy. So you sort of felt a bit sad when throughout this episode, like the Krayt Dragon was constantly killing so many sand people primarily, who were the ones at like huge risk when the plan goes off. Like one gets eaten. There's that sort of kind of funny but also bit sad scene of just they're going to sacrifice one of the banthas to it to try and like have some time where like, okay, it's going to digest this and we'll have a little bit of time to work with that. But instead it goes for the guy who brought the bantha there, and that just was like, oh, this creature is a little bit more smart than we think also. And it just, you know, the Mandalorian was bigging up how like, oh, the Tuscans for like hundreds, thousands of years have been like studying the digestive, systems of the krayt dragon. They know what they're doing, and then it goes for the guy instead of the bantha. It's just like they're open to some new ideas. I thought that was actually a really funny line. But the plan ultimately is that they work together. They use the banthas to bring a lot of explosives to the sort of cave where the krayt dragon resides, and they know that okay, it's going to come out of the cave, and what we have to do is bury all the explosives underneath the area where it's going to come out. So we're going to have to lure it out quite a bit to get its sort of belly into position where the explosion will sort of rip it apart. And so there's a really risky part of the plan in that, like, okay, while it's asleep, they set the trap. But for the trap to be sprung, they have to put everyone at risk. And so, it's a really intense scene because it's such a giant animal. And, after, of course, a few people get killed, it suddenly reveals it also has acid. It can spray out acid that kind of melts a bunch of Tuskens. The explosives are set off, and it injures the krayt dragon, but it doesn't kill it. So there's this whole secondary section where it goes crazy, and it's like, tunneling through a mountain, and we get a great sequence where, of course, the Marshal and the Mandalorian both use their jetpacks to sort of fight it up on top of the mountain. But it builds to the Mandalorian, of course, having to sort of deal the final blow. So they set up that they still have one bantha with a bunch of explosives strapped to it left, and that's what they're going to have to use. They're going to have to sacrifice this bantha, use it as a bomb, and so the Mandalorian lures it to himself and basically gets both of them eaten. And so you think the Mandalorian is dead temporarily, but then he uses his equipment to sort of electrocute it from the inside. He flies out, sets off the explosives from with the bantha is obviously still within the krayt dragon, and blows it up from the inside. There's also a kind of fun reference, I believe it's to Knights of the Old Republic. One of the quests is to, I think, kill a krayt dragon and get the pearl from within inside. So that's what the pearl that they found within the krayt dragon was for. And it also sort of helps to explain why part of the bargain of like the agreement between the people and the Tusken Raiders was that they're the ones who have access to like every part of the sort of corpse of the krayt dragon, was that would give them claim to the pearl inside the krayt dragon. So that's obviously important to them culturally, and I suppose just a valuable item. So that was a cool, fun reference to just a bunch of other stuff. That's more or less kind of how we end it. The Mandalorian gets the Boba Fett armor from the Marshal and kind of heads back. Now, the way the episode ended, I thought they'd end it with like the Mandalorian going off planet, but they seemed to just show him going back to the port where he first got in here, where of course we had the character from before who looked after Baby Yoda. So I guess the next episode will probably still open up with him on Tatooine, because this is, of course, right at the end they reveal, oh, here's Boba Fett. So is the second episode going to focus on Boba Fett and the Mandalorian, like, kind of encountering each other and what exactly happens? That's going to be very, very interesting, because now that we have full confirmation, Boba Fett is in fact in the show, they obviously have quite a bit to cover with this character. Because the show is called The Mandalorian and we've learned a lot more about the Mandalorian culture, this is probably where we will have to get more of a proper history lesson about the history of, I suppose, Jango Fett and how much of a Mandalorian or not he is. Because I think it was the Clone Wars that stated that Jango Fett is not a proper Mandalorian, but it was said at a point in the series where, the guy was sort of like lying about it. I think it was Olmec who was talking about it, and he was obviously more in on things than he was talking about and stuff like that. So him saying that like, oh, he's just a remnant of the past, so he could theoretically be an actual Mandalorian in the old ways, which I guess the way that things are currently with the Mandalorians are more like they were in the past. So that could be quite interesting, and it's going to be. I suppose the most interesting thing is going to be how much of a true Mandalorian is Boba Fett. Because, you know, as he is in the Clone Wars, he seems more like a typical bounty hunter, and especially him in the originals. But now that I suppose that maybe bounty hunting side of him is not as much anymore, and he's going to encounter another, you know, Mandalorian bounty hunter, will we get to see a different side of this character? Because let's be real here, Boba Fett in the originals was pretty much just a cool outfit. We actually got some character from him in Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars appearances. But now there's a need to obviously, like, okay, connect a lot of dots here to link who he was, as we've seen him already, to the character that he's sort of meant to be now and the actual Mandalorian connection. I don't know exactly how they're going to do that, in that, okay, he'll probably want the armor back because it's, you know, his father's helmet and stuff like that. It's important to him, I guess, the armor from that point of view. But, you know, will there be more about him that we sort of... more to him than we sort of have known before is, I suppose, the main thing. Because it still, I think, is the Mandalorian's, you know, quest. The next step of the quest is he still wants to find another Mandalorian to find out where to go. And the ones who would make the most sense to guide him to Jedi, Force-sensitive beings, potentially Yoda's race, would be either Sabine or Bo-Katan. Now, Bo-Katan, I suppose, is going to have to come into the series at some point because of the Moff Gideon connection. Because Moff Gideon has the Darksaber, he had to have gotten that from Bo-Katan. Because Bo-Katan was the last person before Gideon we know to have had the Darksaber, because she was given it by Sabine. Which is why I think either of those characters are going to have to be the ones that they, you know, introduce as the person the Mandalorian sort of comes into contact with in that way. Because I think they will tell us the backstory of the Darksaber. And once Moff Gideon comes back into things, I suppose that will be probably when the plot properly kicks off, because he knew quite a lot about all of the characters in those last few episodes, and it'll be interesting to see just, you know, what the full story with him is, as I suppose our main villain ultimately. But other than that, we don't actually know a lot about the way the exact plot progression is going to go. Most of the teasing and rumors for this season has been about sort of X Clone Wars character will appear, Y Clone Wars character will appear, in that we're expecting, you know, Boba Fett is now confirmed. We're expecting Sabine, who may or may not be the character Sasha Banks is playing. We pretty much, I think, have confirmation Ahsoka is going to appear at some point in the series. Bo-Katan is probably very likely as well. And who knows where else we're going to go. Like, there's a lot of options. But yeah, I do think, I guess it would make sense that the last thing we saw in Rebels was that Sabine and Ahsoka are together. So the Mandalorian encountering them would probably be the most obvious place where he could come into contact with characters who could help him find out about where Yoda's species is from, because Ahsoka has, you know, met Yoda. So Ahsoka specifically would be one of the few characters who is actually familiar with this species to some degree, just by knowing that there's another of its kind. Sabine would be the character to encounter to get him in contact with Ahsoka, but there's so many different paths they can go on, obviously. The main thing is that I don't think every episode, I would like every episode of Season 2 to be like this one, in that, like, I do want to see some more plot-focused episodes. more like the start and ending episodes of the first season. And I'm assuming we are going to get there, in that I think we have the same number of episodes of the first season. Whether they're going to be like closer to an hour than 30 minutes, unlike the first season, that's definitely going to be a big benefit. Now, like we know, Cara Dune's going to get reintroduced, Greef Karga is going to get reintroduced, of course. That's our kind of extended cast. But a lot of I think the hype moments of this season are going to, I think, kind of revolve in a way around a lot of these sort of Clone Wars returning characters introduction. So that's definitely one of the main things to look out for. Other than that, I suppose a few references that they made here. The Marshal's speeder was clearly made from one of the engines of Anakin's pod racer. I think like the paint job was a little bit different, but the design of the parts and stuff like that it was made of, it was clearly one of the two engines on Anakin's pod racer, which was really, really cool to see. Just little references like that roughly make sense of like, okay, that's a famous pod. I believe it is a thing in the Phantom Menace that they sold the pod to make money. So someone else had it. It was used, obviously, in pod racing. Enough years have passed where like it would probably have been surpassed technologically, so it would go into being scrap and could eventually come into the possession of someone out here in a much more isolated section of Tatooine. So that makes sense. It seems a little bit on the nose of just like, oh, of course it's an engine from that, but it makes a little bit more sense than you think. On a planet like this, of course, every piece of technology is going to get recycled in some ways, and it's just nice to see for sure. I think on when he was in the Jawa sandcrawler, I think we saw one of the droids that Luke was offered from before R2 in episode 4. That was another nice reference. And I think that's just an example of like, because you have Dave Filoni on the creative staff and Jon Favreau as sort of the main showrunner, is, he knows Dave Filoni well. Like you can tell those two are going to work together to make really strong references like that make sense. The Boba Fett thing, like it might have been a little on the nose to maybe have the Marshall character just be Boba Fett, but instead they're like, no, let's tease that a little bit because we know he's coming. So let's have a full tease fake out moment at the start, but then boom, here he is in a way you didn't quite expect to see him introduced. In that, I was absolutely expecting Boba Fett to be introduced with the helmet on. So to see him introduced no helmet or mask or anything like that was really cool, because they just allowed, based on facial recognition, for a character who is a clone of another character, and there are so many clones out there. I thought that was just a really strong moment to allow that to work. I'm sure there's a lot of fans maybe who maybe aren't as into maybe the prequels and stuff like that, who are maybe like, who is this? But for people who know what that was, it was really, really fantastic to see. So, yeah, they're my thoughts on The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 1. And also just, I suppose, some of my preview thoughts kind of for the whole season, what my expectations are. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.